Hello and welcome back to another Millennial Minute. Today we're talking about free speech, a very relevant topic these days. You've already heard from our guests. We have Autry Pruitt. He's the CEO of the new Journey PAC, and joining him is a friend of Bold, Nate Lerner, formerly of Build a Wave, I believe. Let's get right into it. Legally, we don't have freedom of speech on social media platforms. So why do so many users believe that we should? Autry, go ahead.
The question is not about freedom of speech. The question is about whether or not you have a right to operate your business using a platform. Think of it like this. We long settled long ago that even if you're an owner of land, if you rent that land from the individual who owns it and you have a lease, even if you violate that lease, guess what? The landlord cannot simply kick you off. They actually have to take you to court, even if you're a business. Because long ago, we decided that even if you violate a lease, you need to go through a judicial process. This is digital land. Parler built, for example, an entire infrastructure, employees and people, etc. And you mean to tell me the landowner can just come and say, oh, you violated the lease and snatch it away with no due process? We abandoned that in real estate hundreds of years ago. It's time to do the same in the digital world as well.
So Nate, so Autry's point is, yeah, okay, maybe, Parler shouldn't be supported by Amazon, but isn't there a process for deplatforming someone instead of just randomly just canceling them?
I'll give Audrey credit for that. Was probably one of the better arguments I've heard in defense of removing people, or not in opposition to removing people from social media sites. However, being said, I think there's a very stark difference between land, between real estate, between owned property versus just a social media site, especially in the digital age where we really don't have as many laws guiding it. The internet is a notoriously free and open place where these private companies can operate very much however they like. There is no international law requiring Facebook or Twitter to follow certain guidelines. Their duty is to their stockholders, to their shareholders, not to the public at large. They really don't have, they have to answer to the US government. So if the US government passes a specific law saying they have to follow these regulations, but otherwise it's their terms of service you have to follow. And it's really simple. They're a private company. When you use their site, you agree to their terms of service. And in the terms of service, they contract you agree to, it says if you violate these, we can remove you. So if you violate their terms of service, they're going to remove you. And that's exactly why they removed Donald Trump from Twitter.
Okay, so we have so I know I'm the moderator, guys, but we have two separate issues here, right? Whether people should be removed from platforms like Donald Trump from Twitter, right? And whether Amazon can decide to deplatform entire websites, right? And fundamentally, we lack regulation on both of these fronts, right? There is no template for who can or can't be removed or what is okay on social media and what isn't. And we also lack regulations on what Autry was talking about. I don't like you. I don't want to do business with you. You're canceled, right? So that's what Amazon did to Parler. And people don't understand that Amazon is kind of the backbone of almost everything we interact with online. Amazon actually makes most of their money off of web services, not delivering packages to our house. So Autry, let's talk about Amazon and what they did, right? Because we could go on about whether Trump should or shouldn't be canceled on social media. There's arguments on both sides. What's particularly concerning, right, is that Amazon, the backbone of the entire internet, can decide to cancel you, Autry, tomorrow without any recourse. And there's no template and there's no regulation around that. Tell us about that.
That's exactly the problem. And that is, I'm glad you made the difference because I was about to make that point. That's exactly the issue. It is exactly like land, right? It is exactly the same. There's only so much infrastructure that can be built, physical space to carry the pipe. Verizon's a great example. Actually, my PAC is going through this now, where we couldn't send some emails because Verizon threatened to shut us off. And we can't go and build another pipe. Even if I had $3 billion, I couldn't go and build another pipe because there's not enough physical space underneath for me to even be able to do that. There's not enough room underneath the ground. So when we're dealing with the backbone of the internet or the warehouse, that needs to be treated like land. And you're right, just like the digital sphere, once upon a time, Nate, the land was the wild, wild west. You had horses, you had stuff going everywhere. But as it became more sophisticated, common law, not statute law, common law began to recognize, you know what? Yeah, we know you own the land, but after you've leased to somebody, even if they violated your lease or your land terms of service, they can't just snatch it away. They need to give you some form of due process or what's called reasonable notice.
Yeah, Nate, I guess I'm concerned because right now everyone's celebrating, right, that they did it to conservatives, but aren't you worried that they'll do the same thing to liberals? Like, don't you worry about progressives' protected speech? I know in a funny world, progressives and conservatives sometimes have a lot in common. And I guess, don't you worry that Verizon is going to turn you off because you were too progressive? You know, you understand what I'm getting at? Like, I'm concerned that we lack regulation in this space and we want to protect not just people on the right, but people on the left as well.
For sure. Well, there's a lot to discuss. It's hard to cover in a short amount of time. One big thing to keep in mind is that Amazon is a private company, as I mentioned earlier, and they're not the only game in town. I don't necessarily strategically agree with their decision with Parler for a multitude of reasons. That being said, I'll defend their right to do it because, again, they're a private company, and Parler can go to another web service provider to host their site. They're not, Amazon's not the only game in town. They are the best, they're the biggest, but there are plenty of others out there that they can utilize. And also that opens up, just like Parler exists because Twitter was doing that, there are other web service providers that now there's a market for as a result. So, what's funny is you have conservatives arguing against the free market right now as a result of what's going on, and here I am, a liberal, defending it. That being said, I do agree there needs to be more regulation. But I think we need to look at the web and the digital space as more of a utility, like we do with electricity and or how we see land similarly as well. But that being said, in its current state and the way the market and the industry currently exists, it's perfectly okay what social media companies, what Amazon are doing.
And we understand that what Amazon did is not illegal, and we don't want to say that it is. I guess the point of this debate is, should there be regulation around this space? And I'm hearing from both of you that the answer is likely yes. Is that correct?
I actually believe that there's already regulation in the space that needs to be enforced, including Amazon's own terms of service contract, in which they should have given a certified letter to Parler, like you would if you were a landlord, saying 30 days, we want you out of here. If they would have did that. Now, in terms of Nate's argument saying, oh, they're not the only game in town, let's talk about the games in town, because you're not talking to a dummy. This is why I'm on here. You have Data Foundry in Texas. You have Rackspace, right? Google does some, but they don't really do a lot of third-party leasing. You have Onsted in Michigan. You have a center in North Dakota, I believe. But it's the same as a building. Oh, you don't have to sell your cigarettes on my land. There's other land for you to buy. Well, guess what? Removing and taking down and recoding from Amazon's servers and using their A2 software, because that's what is built on, their custom software, and moving it to let's say a hyper software, I think it's called VMware, for example, is a huge process and costs an incredible amount of money. So the act of saying that, oh, you're just taking it from one computer and moving to another computer like you would two PCs next to each other, that is a total misconception and is a basic misunderstanding of actually the foundation of how big, large platforming and server and data server farms work.
So Autry, and we're out of time, Nate, but I want to give you the last word because I don't want to, because this is supposed to be a debate. So go ahead, please.
I think, look, I don't necessarily disagree with that. I think, but again, the way we have to look at, if you're going to regulate the internet, you have to do it in a way that's reflective of the internet itself and not based on, how you would approach real estate or land use or land laws or, utilities necessarily. It has to be something that is reflective of that, but also is really at its heart about the internet itself. And I think, your point is well taken that it's comprehensive to move a website from one web server to another, but that doesn't mean that it's not okay to kick someone off a web server if they violate your terms of service. Again, Amazon is a private company; they have every right to do so. Put regulations in place, saying that you give more notice, perhaps, like you would with a landlord. But otherwise, the internet is what it is because it is free, because it is open. And efforts to regulate it, while appropriate and I think needed, do have to be met with caution because it's such a powerful tool. That we need to be aware also of what we could be getting into.
Great. Well, we really appreciate this conversation to you both, Autry and Nate. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And thank you both for being here. Oh, I already thanked them. Thank you all for being here. Be sure to follow us at Bold TV on all social media networks, including Facebook, Twitter, not Parler right now, but when it comes back, we'll be there too. Until next time, I'm David Grasso.